the introduction. Wasn't Petty Officer Christ very good singing the national anthem? I always lament the fact that we all have to stand at attention, and either the band plays or the singer sings or both, and then there's no applause afterwards because we're still standing at attention. So great job. Great job as well by our Honor Guard who's here today, and great job from our Coast Guard Band. Now the Coast Guard Band and I spent some quality time together up in New London yesterday. The Vice President spoke to the graduating class at the Coast Guard Academy. Today we have 22 new ensigns out there in the fleet, and I'm just amazed at the quick turnaround of the band to get down here under the direction of Captain Ken Megan, because it was much easier for me to get down here yesterday than it was for them to get from New London down here and be prepared to play today. So thank you for being here, and you guys sound great as usual. Thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out here today and for all the hard work that's gone into making this rededication ceremony possible. A special welcome to my colleague, Acting Commissioner Thomas Winkowski from Customs and Border Protection. Thank you for being here as we observe the manners of our profession. Thanks to everybody in uniform here today, to Coast Guardsmen past and present, active, reserve, auxiliary, and civilians, and all other veterans who have served our nation, as well as the family members of those who have served. Welcome to the family members of the crew of the Coast Guard Cutter Tampa honored on this memorial today, as well as the commanding officer, Commander Susan Palizzotto, who's here from the modern-day Tampa, and two of her crew members. And finally, a tremendous thanks to the DC chapter of the Chief Petty Officers Association for your hard work and the contributions of all those who donated their time and their treasure to make this possible. You know, you can't really appreciate today, and you can't really appreciate the condition of this memorial unless you've been out here like I have, like Chief Warrant Officer Ed Kruska, who I see over here, Chief Warrant Officer Ed Kruska, Master Chief Petty Officer Mark Allen, Senior Chief Ostrowski, and others. We have this organization called Flags Across America they do a ceremony here every Veterans Day. I've attended it many times over about the last 14 years, and each year I came out here, I saw this memorial deteriorating. All that stone that you see there at the base, that's placed to make it look like a compass rose. The years of winters and summers and freezing and refreezing had heaved all that stone. It was all falling apart. A major chunk was taken out of the marble up at the top of the pyramid, I'm told because lightning struck it once. And in general, it just wasn't really representative of honoring our profession. So I'm so delighted that everybody's been working to bring this to a reality. I encourage you all to get up and get a close look at it before you leave here today. I had the great privilege this morning. Commander Rick Batson of my staff brought in a large file folder and placed it on my desk. It's the file folder for the dedication ceremony in 1928. All the letters, all the fundraising letters, the programs, and then more importantly, pictures of the day back in 1928. I was thinking about 85 years from today. And there's going to be some little plastic discs that are going to be sitting in the historian's office. They might not even have anything that can play those anymore 85 years from now. So it'll be interesting to see how our history is recorded then, and what some commandant 85 years from now will be looking at and thinking about as we try to remember this day. So having had that folder and seen those pictures, as I look around today, it's not hard for me to imagine the crowd very similar to this one that gathered on this very spot 85 years ago. Instead of the terrific Coast Guard band that we have today, we made do with the Navy band. And I'm sure we were very grateful to have the Navy band, but it's good to... I'm sorry, Admiral Todashek. But it's great to have our Coast Guard band here, as I said. But the Navy band was set up just about right over there. In fact, they oriented the whole ceremony about 90 degrees off of how we're sitting here today. There was a platform right over there about where the band is, where all the speakers were. The band was behind, and most of the honor guard and other people were along the street over here. So if you can imagine that, I wish I could share the pictures with you, but it was, I mean, I got goosebumps looking at those pictures this morning. And in the distance, down that hill, which is now blocked by trees and the beautiful Air Force Memorial, you could see the twin masts of the Coast Guard cutter Apache. The Apache was anchored down here in the Potomac because with her shallow draft, she could get a little further up the river. But as you went down the river, just downstream, there were the cutters Manning and the cutter Seneca and the brand new cutter Tampa, which had been built and was named to memorialize the Tampa lost during World War I. And she had been commissioned just a year and a half earlier than the ceremony. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Captain William Wheeler, and I ask you to remember that name, stepped forward and signaled to the bugler to sound attention and called everyone assembled here to order. It was a distinguished crowd that afternoon. The invocation was given by the Chief of Chaplains for the United States Navy. The Secretary of the Treasury was here, the Secretary of the Navy, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and they all provided remarks from the podium that was set up right over there facing the memorial. Also present was the Chief of Naval Operations, the Marine Corps General John Lejeune, and ambassadors and representatives from 11 separate countries. Crew members from the cutters that were anchored in the Potomac, along with cadets from the Coast Guard Academy, served as the honor guard. And they were all lined up along the road over here behind the podium. As the assembled crowd stood at attention and finished singing the Star-Spangled Banner, you could feel the reverberations of Apache's gun as she signaled the 21-gun salute. And shortly after, Treasury Secretary Mellon stepped to the platform and he began with these words, quote, "We've come here today to dedicate a memorial to the men of the Coast Guard who died in the World War. It is erected in gratitude to those who gave their lives for their country. In the hour of her great need, when danger threatened, and when civilization itself seemed in the balance, these men laid down their lives in order that you and I, and future generations, might find the world a better place to live in." End quote. So, I've always thought it's better to view historical events like the original dedication of this memorial through the lens of time. Time gives you perspective. It allows you to be objective, to judge and to understand the events and the free flow of emotion that may have attended the actual event. It makes for a better, more reasoned decisions about the meaning and significance of what took place. But sometimes it's good to remember the emotion, to view the events not through the lens of time, but through the perspective of those who were there in the moment. From that perspective, you can gain a better understanding of who were there and know some measure of what they were feeling. And I'm struck by Secretary Mellon's words that, quote, "civilization itself seemed in the balance," end quote. At the time of the original dedication of this memorial, those gathered here were less than 10 years removed from the ceasefire that ended what they called the Great War. For them, it was more recent than 9/11 is to all of us here assembled today. Just imagine, 16 million people died during that war. Almost 9 million of them were men and women serving in uniform. 9 million. That number's even hard to fathom. And everyone here believed that they had just fought the war to end all wars. And you can see it documented behind me. At the base of the memorial, it says World War, not World War I or World War II or World Wars. It's World War. Now, Captain Wheeler, who I mentioned earlier, who began the ceremony that day, was the chairman of the committee to build this memorial. He organized the drive to raise the necessary funds and shepherded the project from beginning to end. It was a significant effort, and I'm sure all the chiefs here can attest to that, and he accomplished it in a relatively remarkable short time. But he was more than just the committee chairman. He had been the commanding officer of the Coast Guard cutter Seneca, and as he stood here that day, The names of 11 members of his crew were carved on the marble on the other side of the monument. You see, Seneca was on convoy escort duty when one of the ships in her convoy, the British steamer Wellington, was hit by a torpedo. After engaging and attacking the U-boat and forcing it to submerge, Captain Wheeler went to the Wellington's aid. He sent 20 volunteers from his crew to assist the Wellington. Most of Wellington's crew refused to stay aboard the damaged ship, so his Coast Guard volunteers and one Navy crewman were left to man the pumps and the gun. As the only escort, Seneca had to break away and continue steaming to protect the other ships in the convoy. Captain Wheeler could only hope that his small party of volunteers would be able to save the Wellington. Unfortunately, her damage was too severe. It was 4 days later that Captain Wheeler learned that despite the valiant effort to save the Wellington and her cargo, she eventually sank, taking 11 of his 18 volunteers with her. And it's said the loss of his men affected Captain Wheeler very deeply. I can only imagine that. I've lost one crew member on one of my ships in an accident. I've unfortunately lost Coast Guardsmen as commandant. And here he had 11 people that he sent over, albeit them volunteers, to that ship to save it, and he lost them. So I had the privilege to visit the National Archives about a week ago, and I had the opportunity to see the original deck logs of the Seneca, with Captain Wheeler's name at the top. And I read the details of this event. Even in the dry language of a logbook, I could sense the loss. And just 5 days later, after that loss, Tampa was sunk by an enemy submarine in the British Channel, and all on board that ship were lost, including 111 Coast Guardsmen. Just finished escorting a convoy out of Gibraltar and was returning to Milford Haven, her home port. During the war, she had escorted 18 convoys comprised of 350 ships and lost only 2 ships to enemy action. Tampa went down quickly. Search and rescue efforts over the course of 3 days only turned up one body. One of the Coast Guardsmen lost aboard Tampa was Quartermaster Clement Minor Lawrence. I had the honor this morning of posthumously presenting his Purple Heart to Mrs. Lavinia Ruth Abel in a ceremony at Coast Guard headquarters earlier today. Mrs. Abel and several of her relatives of Clement Lawrence are here today and have joined us for this rededication. At the same ceremony, I had the privilege of honoring another Coast Guardsman, Seaman First Class William John Miller. Seaman Miller served aboard another ship in another convoy in another war some 30 years later. He was aboard the Leopold, which was sunk by a torpedo in 1944. We lost 177 Coast Guardsmen that day. Seaman Miller was among 28 who survived. All were awarded the Purple Heart, and those awards have been presented as family members have been identified over the years. So I was privileged today to present his daughter, Mrs. Pam Miller, who is also here with us today with the Purple Heart. It's appropriate that the families of both Clement Lawrence and William Miller are here today. The memorial behind me honors those members of our service who gave their lives during the First World War, but as we gather this week before Memorial Day, we honor all those who put service before self and answered the call of their country. In his remarks that day, Captain Wheeler said that this memorial typifies the simplicity and stability of sea service, portrays its ideals and its characteristics, and fittingly honors both those who sleep beneath the seas and those who repose in the sacred soil of America. You'll notice that this memorial looks awfully good to be 85 years old. That certainly wasn't the case just over a year ago. Decades of weather and exposure had taken its toll on this monument. Answering the call both to honor our profession and to honor those who have served, our Washington, D.C. Chief Petty Officers Association took it upon themselves to continue to pay respect to those who gave so much by restoring this monument to their service and to their sacrifice. The Chief sent out a call to raise the necessary funds to do this work, and the results were amazing. Senior Chief Petty Officer John Ostrowski was the president of the D.C. chapter who initiated this work. Senior Chief John Grimes took over leadership of the Restoration Committee, kept the momentum going, and brought the project home. They received donations large and small from all over our Coast Guard. Thanks also go to Joe Battaglia and Kevin McSweeney. Mr. John David Power, I hope he had a chance to make it. And the Navy Memorial, represented by Vice Admiral John Todashek, the veterans of foreign wars, and so many others who helped us preserve this great memorial to those who have served. In fact, the chiefs did so well that they exceeded their goal by almost 50%. Those extra funds have gone into a trust to be administered by the Coast Guard Foundation to provide for the future maintenance of the memorial and to ensure it always looks as good as it does today. You know, with every memorial we build, we pray that it will be our last. And I'm sure that was the prayer 85 years ago today. But that was not to be the case. Our country has called her sons and daughters to service many times since then, to oppose injustice and tyranny, to help those in need, to fight to preserve all that's good and right in the world. And those sons and daughters have always answered the call. Time may have faded the surface of this memorial, but time has no similar effect on what this memorial stands for. The meaning of the sacrifice of those it honors does not abate. In fact, it continues to grow. This memorial is more relevant and meaningful today, viewed through the lens of history, than it was on the day that it was built. As we stand here today, surrounded in this hallowed ground by so many who gave so much in service to their country, it's not hard to feel what President Wilson once called that solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service. There are so many great Coast Guard heroes here in Arlington, and since we last gathered here as a service, too many brave patriots and servants to their nation have joined their shipmates. In our service, we often talk about the long blue line of Coast Guardsmen. We say ours is blue, but all who serve have this line, whether it's blue, green, or khaki. It describes those who've served before us, their accomplishments, their commitment, and their sacrifice. But it's more than looking back in our wake and honoring those that have served. It's looking at the course we've set before us and the obligation we have to our organization, our people, and our country. It's our legacy, and a reminder of the responsibility we all have to keep faith with those who have come before us. Secretary Mellon recognized this 85 years ago when he said of those honored here, "Their work has been accomplished, but ours is yet to come. We must be ready to live as they were ready to die, for the things that America believes in and for the principles for which she stands." And as I stand here today, I feel that core, that pride that President Wilson spoke of and Secretary Mellon spoke of as well. And standing here, how can we not? But I feel much more. I also feel a sense of gratitude for the sacrifices that have been made, not just by those who gave their lives in service, but for the husbands and wives and sons and daughters that were left behind. And as I look out here today, I also feel hope. As I look around me here today, I see all those men and women who wear the uniform of their country, all those who have answered the call to service and who have acted on the belief that you put service before self, and they've taken their place in that long blue line. And once again, it fills me with hope. As long as that spirit lives, that hope, then we have truly honored those who have served and given so much. And they can rest knowing that we will never stop working to fulfill Secretary Mellon's wish that future generations might find the world a better place to live in. Thank you, and Semper Paratus.